Boy, translate this. Boy, read that. From Midgard to Jotunheim, tell the boy to raid giant rocks to your heart's content in this power fantasy cosplaying as a story in God of War. The 2018 soft reboot that was a PlayStation exclusive for about 4 years came over to PC in 2022 and has everything from the undead to dragons to Norse gods for you to slay as Kratos, the Greek god of war. Gameplay, and a little about the story. God of War actually has a surprisingly simple story, albeit heartbreaking. You have lost your beloved wife, whose final request was that you and your 10-year-old son Atreus go on a bonding experience to take her ashes to scatter at the highest peak in the realms. The only problem is that no adventure is ever as simple as it seems, and on your pleasant walk you find that the world is becoming increasingly corrupted by monsters and gods alike, all of which want to kill you and your kid. You travel through Midgard to a realm room that takes you all over other realms that are familiar to Nordic enthusiasts, each of which holds their own quirks and secrets to find your way to the highest peak of all the realms. While taking on the name God of War like the games from the 2000s, this is actually a sequel that continues the story of those games rather than a full reboot. While I am not fully familiar with the originals, the references seem to be consistent with those stories, and the story in the 2018 version pays a great homage to its predecessors. You meet some extremely interesting and fleshed out characters in your adventure, with very emotional stories coming from the goddess Freya and the god Balder, among others, as well as really funny backstories from characters like the self-proclaimed smartest man alive, Mimir. There are also plenty of others you'll meet along the way, like the teleporting dwarves to enhance your gear, as well as the absolute biggest serpent you'll ever lay your eyes upon, all of which deliver great backstories and optional quests to give you more purpose to your exploration. This is an absolutely wonderful story with emotional moments, funny quips, and a terrific adventure even with the simple quest of scattering the ashes of your wife. One thing that really stood out to me was when using a small boat to get around, Kratos and Mimir will tell stories to Atreus to pass the time. While a small detail, it really adds to the world building and lore-heavy narrative, and keeps interesting what would normally be a really boring traversal mechanic. In my approximately 40-hour playthrough, I had an absolute blast with no dull moments. This is one of the best cases of a modern game with no loading screens, as they are hidden behind climbing and crawling sections, as well as enormous doors when changing places. One of the best additions is the ability to fast travel without a loading screen, as you go into the realm between realms on a small walk to let the world load. I don't know what game started this trend of hiding loading screens, but God of War is absolutely near, if not at the top of the list for implementation. However, while the world is open, in air quotes, it is actually relatively linear because of two reasons: the progressively open world and the leveled enemies. The progressive open world is something that I really enjoy, with more and more of the world being open to you as you progress through the story. I won't spoil how this works because it is a pretty cool reveal, but the implementation is very interesting in a way that I haven't seen in any other titles. Now with that said, there is another reason for the open world being less open than it appears, which is high-leveled enemies. Enemies in certain areas are absurdly overleveled and take a giant smelly dump on you if they get a hit in. I am personally a fan of this as far as game balance, but the implementation is a little lacking and may put some people off. It never really gets explained why this random grunt can annihilate the God of War, but the same grunt in a different area is just cannon fodder, which is a little weird to experience. Before we get into the dueling, there is one more part of the game that I briefly mentioned earlier, which is the climbing sections. This is absolutely not a platformer, and the climbing is basically just pressing forward and jumping occasionally, but the reason I bring it up is the yellow paint that is so prevalent in these games holding your hand through your playthrough. God of War is one of the biggest perpetrators of the yellow paint conundrum, but this is also one of the few that explains why there is all this yellow shit everywhere you're supposed to go. Once again, no spoilers, but the explanation is an absolutely incredible addition with a reveal very late in the story. And speaking of holding your hand, this is arguably the game's biggest weak point. Sony assumes, and mostly correctly, that their audience is the biggest group of idiots that have ever walked planet Earth. In the cinematic sections, you're told what buttons to press and when. In the puzzles, you have Atreus in your ear after 3 seconds telling you how to solve it, and everybody in the story saying, "Did you do this yet?" if you haven't been to an important location yet. The only part of the constant hand-holding I did like is that resources have a description saying, "Use this resource for this specific purpose. It has no other uses," so that you don't carry stuff around trying to save it for the best possible opportunity. Outside of that one thing, the constant babying from Sony is really frustrating and removes what could be some fun puzzles and challenges to try and keep you moving. Even with a fantastic story, the combat still delivers in this Sony production. Based on a style that is similar to the Dark Souls series, there are more than enough ways to play the game, with full trees for Kratos' 3 weapon options, as well as 2 trees for different types of arrows that Atreus uses. You won't have to make too many choices on those trees, as they mostly serve as upgrades rather than a build tree, because you can get every skill in the game using earned experience from combat and questing. Even so, each of your Leviathan Axe, Bare Hands, and the returning Blades of Chaos from the original series of the 2000s have combos, special attacks, and modifiers that allow for significantly more variety than just mashing attack as fast as you can, as well as a ranged throw from each to let you keep your distance or get up close and personal at your own leisure. Along with the skill trees, you also get to choose 2 abilities that have cooldowns and are incredibly powerful. There are plenty of options to ponder, from explosive slams to freezing fissures to meteor storms, with each providing fun ways to play and have extremely unique animation. I did find some abilities to be weaker than others, but I didn't have any problems with any ability being completely unusable. The combat here is varied, but it isn't the best you'll ever play when compared to other Souls-likes. The only serious problem is that it can feel a little clunky when enemies get behind you, as the quick turn can move you too far and is a difficult button to press if you don't have an elite controller, and not using the quick turn is really slow and made me take damage more often than not. The sole solution I found to this was to use a mouse and keyboard, but the rest of the game is better experienced on a controller. God of War is on the upper echelon of melee-focused story games, just don't expect to return over and over again specifically for the combat past New Game Plus. Sound, music, and voice. Absolutely impeccable sound design is on display in God of War. Every axe strike, every pound of a fist, every wave of the Lake of Nine, every scream and voice line is masterfully done. What really stands out in the sound design is how much the more secondary sounds come into play. While the hits and grunts are great, I really enjoyed the sounds of the axe freezing the ground or smacking a wall during a fight to bring it all together, with the sounds of background enemies revving up for an attack to let you know what's coming. This is in my top 5 for sound design, up there with the first Hellblade and Subnautica. While not on the same level as the sound design, the music can still be considered on that second tier of gaming. This is really well designed around the Nordic style of the game, letting you experience what kind of music may have been playing in Old Norse tales. There are lots of strings to go into music kind of similar to The Witcher, but a little more intense rather than relaxing. Each section of the world gets its own music, as well as every combat and cinematic sequence. I would have liked to see the music play a little bit larger part in the story, but it was still a solid addition, particularly in the slower sections when you're traveling rather than fighting. Now to my favorite part of the game, the voice acting. Obviously, Christopher Judge puts on a master class here with the awards that he took home for his work as Kratos, but the supporting characters are where God of War shines. As much as I abhor child actors, Sony managed to find one of the few good ones in Sonny Suljic as Atreus, who is able to portray loss, anger, and everything in between at such a young age. I can't name everyone in the game for the sake of time, but my personal favorite is Alistair Duncan as Mimir. He's hilarious throughout, with quips, stories, and analogies to serve as the comedic relief in what is otherwise a pretty dark and serious game. Graphics and art. While God of War isn't going to stand up to more modern games like Hellblade in terms of how realistic its graphics are just because of being made 7 years ago on older hardware, you won't be disappointed either. In the current year 2025, the graphics still look really good, but the real star here is the color popping. The Leviathan axe has a light blue tint added to every attack due to its freezing capabilities, and the Blades of Chaos do the same with a bright red. These stand out in different environments, such as the trip to the frozen tundra of Helheim allows you to pop the red of the blades against the blue of the surroundings. I really like how they went with contrasting colors for when you traverse to different realms, as the blades are generally more useful in bluer tinted areas, while the axe is generally more useful in redder tinted areas. It's a really cool choice that may go right over the heads of a lot of gamers if you aren't thinking about it, but it helps to differentiate God of War in terms of art style, where it could have been another generic, pretty game without the attention to detail to include such high contrast. While this isn't the absolute best looking game you'll play in the current year, this choice really helps it to hold up and last longer in the art department than it probably should have. Performance. I played God of War on a 14900K and RTX 3070 as well as the 3080 Ti and had no issues with performance at all. I played most of the game with high settings and had a steady 90 FPS with no frame drops, no stuttering, no crashes, and no pop-it. This was a huge surprise given the state of most console ports, with Sony even allegedly giving better performance and graphical options on PC than on console, though I need to note that I did not play this game on a PlayStation to verify those claims. This game's performance outpaces many modern games while still giving one of the prettiest worlds that is in the industry today. Final verdict. This is arguably the best $50 you'll ever spend on a video game, with God of War earning a full price recommendation from me, and even that feeling like highway robbery. This is one of the best games I've had the pleasure of playing, absolutely deserving of my longest review so far. Just as a standalone story, this would have gotten a rave review, but throw in the dynamic combat, skill trees, weaponry options, and cinematic battles, and you have yourself one of the best games ever created. If you haven't tried this game, I cannot possibly overstate my recommendation to boot it up. I do reviews like this one for the games I play on stream, so check me out on Twitch if you're interested in watching me experience these games. If you liked the review, give it a like, and if you didn't, then give it a dislike. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.